Today, in 2013, the federal government has been undermining the process for justice for the survivors at St. Anne's Residential School in Fort Albany by deliberately withholding the documentation relating to major police investigation and court testimony into the sexual abuse and torture that took place at St. Anne's. This is what the federal government told the survivors of St. Anne's Residential School, quote, "There is no known incidents found in documents regarding sexual abuse at Fort Albany Indian Residential School. This is a false narrative, and it has undermined the rights of the victims for justice." What it meant is that the victims had to go before the hearings and tell from memory to see whether or not they would be believed in this private process. Meanwhile, federal lawyers knew there was a large body of evidence, 7,000 pages worth, that documented the rape of male and female children, the sustained physical, psychological, and sexual abuse of children at St. Anne's, the evidence that children were forced to eat their own vomit, the torture of children with whips, and most disturbingly of all, that there was an electric shock torture program at St. Anne's with a homemade electric chair that was used on children as young as 6 years of age.
Welcome back to Power and Politics. Aboriginal Canadians were used as experiment subjects in nutritional and medical tests, according to the head of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Documents discovered by a food historian with the University of Guelph reveal that 1,300 malnourished Aboriginal people, mostly children, were used as test subjects in the 1940s and 50s by researchers looking at the effectiveness of vitamin supplements. Now, Justice Murray Sinclair says Aboriginal Canadians were also used in medical experiments. Protesters are demanding the government honor its apology to residential school victims and release all documents related to the schools. Will the Commission get access to all the documents it needs to do its job? What details does it have about these experiments conducted on Aboriginal people in Canada? Joining me now in Winnipeg is the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Justice Murray Sinclair. Good to see you, Justice Sinclair.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Tell me, Justice Sinclair, does the Commission have documents with evidence of some of the things we've been hearing about in the past couple of days, these nutritional experiments that were done on First Nations children, and then I know you've also mentioned medical experiments?
Yes, we have received documents some time ago relating to the nutritional experiments that has been referred to in the research that was done by Ian Mosby. And we've also come across documents that related to the testing of vaccines with respect to tuberculosis that was conducted on some of the residential school children in Saskatchewan.
What have you seen in those documents related to the vaccines, and can you give us any details about what that was?
Well, in the 1930s, tuberculosis was a widely significant disease around the world, not just in Canada. And the scourge of it was significant to all sorts of populations. And there was a movement to test a certain vaccine referred to as BCG that had started in France. There had been some testing of it done in Montreal, and they decided to test it on school children in residential schools in Saskatchewan to see if the vaccine would have an impact upon the rates of tuberculosis that were occurring in residential schools. Tuberculosis was a significant disease in residential schools because of the poor nutrition and the poor ventilation in the schools. And the concern around the doing of that, of course, would be the fact that the parents were never informed and never consented to their children being tested.
And did that come as a surprise to you to learn that?
Nothing about residential schools comes as a surprise to me, quite frankly.
But that would come as it does come as a surprise to me, and may to many Canadians. It seems like such a startling piece of history to encounter.
Well, that in and of itself, I think, is important for us to understand, because the Canadian public at large was denied a lot of information about residential schools long before the schools themselves became known through the litigation and the settlement agreement. Mm-hmm. And the fact that schools existed, in fact, was a surprise to many Canadians. But the existence of the schools and what went on in the schools is slowly becoming better known throughout society. The real issue, I think, for us is with each revelation and the concerns that it raises, what are we going to ultimately do about the impact that they're having on society?
And what do you think should be done as you learn more and as Canadians learn more?
Well, the Canadian public, I think, first of all, we have to appreciate the fact that they're just beginning to have their eyes open to all of this. But ultimately, they're going to have to come to terms with the fact that the legacy of residential schools and the relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people and between Aboriginal people and the government was badly damaged by all of these truths. And that being the case, the question is, what do we do now about fixing that relationship? And that's what reconciliation and the dialogue around reconciliation is going to have to be all about.
As you know, the story about the nutritional experiments prompted and honored the apology rallies across the country, with some demanding, of course, that the government, release all documents related to those parts. And I know that's been a struggle for you in the past. Where are you in the process of getting the documents that you need from the federal government?
Well, we received the documents relating to those experiments that occurred in residential schools. We have not been able to receive, and it's not within our mandate to receive documents relating to any nutritional experiments that went on in the communities, and we know that that has occurred. But insofar as the rest of the documents are concerned, we were faced with reluctance and resistance on the part of the government with respect to the documents that were contained at the Library and Archives Canada, which are the historical documents. And that resistance finally ended after the court decision, which ruled in our favor in January of this year. Since then, the government has started to take some steps to make those documents available to us, but the question now is whether they have enough time and enough resources to be able to do it within the time left in our mandate.
And the mandate ends, of course, next July. What happens if you don't get the things you need by that point in time? What happens to the whole process?
Well, that's a very good question, and we don't have the answer to that because the Commission itself can't make its own ruling. I think that because there is a settlement agreement, because it was a settlement agreement of a class action, the courts continue to hold a supervisory role with respect to the terms of the agreement and the compliance of the parties to their obligations under the agreement. And if we are unable to work out a solution insofar as our capacity to do a proper analysis and archiving of the documents and to receive all of the documents by the deadline, then we may ask the court to tell us what the answer is to the dilemma that's being created by the parties.
At this point in time, where you are now with all of this, with still a lot of work to do, are you in a position to say whether you believe that the official apology that this government offered 5 years ago to First Nations people, was it enough combined with what you're doing? Do you think it will satisfy people that have lived through some of the things you're hearing about?
Well, people will come to their own determination about that, I think. Insofar as our own view about that, I think that you're going to have to read our final report to know what the commissioners are going to say.
So still lots of time, I guess, to figure out whether it was adequate and how you move forward.
Well, we have a consultation process that we still have to complete with the survivors and with the Canadian public. And once that consultation process is complete, then we'll do our analysis and come to our own assessment of the situation and make some recommendations around it.
Okay, Justice Sinclair, always a pleasure to speak with you. I hope we'll talk again as your job continues.
Thank you, Rosemary.